everybody. Welcome back to the stream. We're moving away from the Boer War videos today briefly. We're going to talk about my time in Africa, and if you've recently subscribed, there is a stream called The Trip which talks about the 5 years that I spent in South Africa from 1971 to 1976. And in the last video we heard from my sister, who had organised with Dad to bring me back from the grips of crime, petty crime and drug usage, and making a nuisance of myself, refusing to shower apparently. And so I came back to Australia. It was early January 1976, maybe even the first week of January. So we're going to talk about that first year of being back and the changes. And I was 16 or coming on for 16 anyway. I was 15. And but before we go there, let's just step back into South Africa for a little bit for those 5 years that I was there, because one thing I wanted to mention were what they call the bioscopes. We would call them the movies. And even Dad at the time was amused that the South Africans were using such an old term, bioscope. It's really an old word for projected images or movies. But in Brakpan on Saturday afternoons was the kids' bioscope, and there were hundreds of these kids all gathered on the pavement to get in to see these movies that were tailored for kids. Now they're all white kids, of course. Black kids weren't allowed to come in, but it was an opportunity to to maybe get to sit next to a girl and to hold her hands, to get the courage up. I remember gripping some poor girl's hand and too nervous to let it go, and the sweat was forming between our hands. I didn't want to let it go in case I didn't get the courage to grip her hand again. All very childlike and innocent sort of stuff going on, but there was it was very similar to what my dad would have seen. They showed the serials from each week, Flash Gordon or things of that ilk. Kids rolling Jaffas down the aisle. I remember some kids letting off stink bombs one time. Hadn't changed at all since when Dad was a kid and going to the movies on those Saturday afternoons. Matinees, they called them. The other one I wanted to remember was Jenny Blackstock, or Rusty, as we called her, my first girlfriend over there. I remember not long before I came back, we had the Brakpan High dance, I think it was, end of year dance or something, and me getting the courage to go over to Jenny's to ask her if she could come with me. I had the long khaki greatcoat and probably my hunting knife in the pocket and whatever things I thought were cool around those times. I remember her father answering the door and me trying to get the courage to ask her along. So he sent her to the door. I said, "Do you think you could come to the dance with me? Could you ask your dad if you can come?" And so she went off and I could hear her. She said, "Dad, I wouldn't be allowed to go to the dance, would I?" Of course he said no. So I went on my own. But in the other room I have a big plastic bag full of letters that were written from those people in Brakpan, and I've got quite a lot of letters from Jenny for quite a number of years. Rusty and I would keep those letters going backwards and forwards. I would see her again years later, and we might get into that as this story unfolds. But what we're going to talk about today is, arriving back. Picked up at the airport, Tullamarine. I flew out of Jan Smuts Airport with Dad and Aidan and Agnes to see me off. Took the flight over and picked up at Tullamarine by Roscoe, Pauline's husband, and little Megan, Roscoe's daughter from his first relationship or marriage, and my sister. I remember driving along and they had a little orange Honda Civic, sort of 75 Honda Civic, tiny little car. I remember driving along and peppering them with questions, and the sorts of things I wanted to know was what was on TV. Was Get Smart still on? Was F Troop still on? Well, you know, with the series still being run on the show. We stopped off at Nana and Gramps on the way from the airport, I think. Nana was, she was the glue that kept our family together. She was the one that always remembered all the grandkids' birthdays, and she'd put a $2 note in or a $5 note in the card. If you went over to Nana's, there inevitably would be other family turning up, and she was in her last years. I did visit her a few times on my own, but we'll get into that as the story rolls along. Got to use a few notes here because it's quite a lot happens, and I want to try and keep some sort of format to it. So I settled in. I remember we stopped at the local fruit shop on the way back to where my sister lived. She lived in a little dead-end street in East Malvern, which is a leafy, wealthy suburb of Melbourne. Lots of big parks, and so we stopped and got a few things, and then we were back home again at the house that Roscoe had lived in as a boy himself. He bought it from his father, and it was just a weatherboard house in a beautiful little dead-end street with lots of trees in that. So I was, I started going around with my sister, helping her do the shopping. The first few times we went out shopping, I was still in South Africa mode, I think, because I was expecting Africans there to pack the bags or to carry your shopping to the car. It was a culture shock. It was a reawakening for me of the culture. I wanted to recreate the Australia that I had left behind. I didn't want anything to have changed, but of course Australia had changed and had moved on, and I was yet to discover that. But the first thing I did discover, of course, was the television, which I'd missed for all those years. South Africa had just had television coming in before I left, and now back in Australia, and it was colour television. And of course the first thing I wanted to see were the music shows. I'd been starved of any rock music over there in Brakpan. Now Brakpan, if you hear me mention, is the town we lived in the Transvaal in South Africa. TV here, they had a Saturday morning. It was like it started really early, and there was a couple of music shows that ran for 3 or 4 hours each, and it went till about midday. They were like Sounds Unlimited, I think, with Donny Sutherland, and they played music clips of the day. They might have some local acts that were touring coming on the show. They might announce some tours of people coming, and I was just spellbound and fixated on these Saturday morning music shows. Also, Countdown was beginning on Sunday nights, but mostly I had to watch what Roscoe liked, which was the ABC and Doctor Who and that sort of thing. My sister had these like faded khaki army shirts she used to wear with a pair of jeans. They looked fantastic to my mind, and I bugged her, and she might have given me her army shirt, or I went to the army disposal. I remember I loved going to the army disposals. I started wanting to wear these army shirts everywhere I went, and so I was reaching out to people that I hadn't seen for a long time, and one of those was a family friend called the Bentleys. My mum had made friends with a woman called, I'm not sure of her first name, but she was married to an American, and they were the Bentleys. And they lived sort of in South Caulfield, and they had a series of daughters. I think it was Anne, B, C for Chris, and D for Denise. D was my age. The girls were named alphabetically. So I remember we reached out and contacted them, and I might have gone over and seen Mum's old friend. And anyway, Denise took it upon herself to take me out and show me around, in those first months of being back. And one of the places we went to was Moomba. Now, Moomba's a festival they have in Melbourne. They used to have a parade up Swanston Street with floats and characters dressed up and people on stilts, and they might still have that, but it was traditionally a word for having fun in Aborigine, apparently. And so it's all centred around the Yarra River, which flows through Melbourne. And so Dee took me to Moomba, and we were mingling with the crowds. And I remember I had the knife in my pocket, in my sock, and it fell out. And she said, "What are you carrying a knife for?" It was me trying to readjust to being over here. So anyway, we went to the Maya Music Bowl, which is it's a dome, and it's got slopes down. It's an auditorium for music and concerts and performances, and they used to put on 3XY was the radio station, and they would put on a free concert every Moomba. So I remember we went there and we saw AC/DC. Now I had no idea who they were, but my Denise or Dee was telling me about AC/DC. That was my first experience with that band. So we're talking early 1976. Now, of course, I wanted to know about all sorts of things from my sister, and I remember my sister saying as she was driving me around one time, "Oh, there's this band, they're very weird and they're very strange, and they have this transvestite playing guitar with the tongue comes out, and they're very shocking." And of course she was talking about Skyhooks, and the transvestite was of course Red Simmons. And I did actually see Skyhooks at Moomba one year, with those first years as they were getting onto a boat to float down the Yarra for some filming. I got close to Skyhooks. So I hadn't been back long, and we had to decide where to go to school for me. Now, my sister had been to CIT, I think it was, or it was a Melbourne technical school. She'd gone back to do her studies, and one of the lecturers was like a professor, I suppose, and she asked him to come over for dinner because they didn't know what to do with me, or I didn't know what to do with myself. So he came over, and as I remember, he was a real sort of lefty. He had the badges with Save the Whale, and it was only not long after political upheaval in Australia where Gough Whitlam had been sacked, and there was a lot of political fervour. So he came over for dinner, and I remember him sitting with me on the couch, and he was asking me, well, what do you want to do, and what are you interested in? I remember bringing out some artwork of Jimi Hendrix. It was a big poster, that album cover of Hendrix sitting on the stool with the hat and the feather, and he's playing a 12-string guitar. Well, I told the fella that I'd drawn this, but actually Dad had drawn it for me. All I'd done was draw some words around the image of Hendrix, of song titles, which he pointed out weren't actually Hendrix songs anyway, they were the Bob Dylan songs. So anyway, from that, I think it came out that I had no idea what I wanted to do or how I wanted to do it. So he suggested Caulfield Tech. He said there are courses at Caulfield Tech, which was the closest school for me, which didn't necessarily involve technical topics like, woodwork or sheet metal or any of those trade type jobs, because he ascertained pretty quick that I wasn't very good with my hands. I wasn't a trades type person. So he suggested going and having a look there at some courses that they had which were designed for people that didn't want to do the trades. The only thing was that Caulfield Tech was a boys' school, but it was the closest to where my sister lived. So that's where I went. I ended up going to Caulfield Tech. And indeed, the topics that I chose, or the subjects I chose, were like typing and accountancy, I think geography maybe, maths. And so we were quite a small class. There was only 12 of us. And you'll see a photo of me in that class, and I chose to wear a skivvy on the day to be different from all the others. It was quite a hard school to get started in because I had short hair, I had a South African accent. I remember I had my haversack from Brackpan High with all the band names I'd written on it. The bag that I was getting into trouble so often at Brackpan High, I was using now for Caulfield Tech. And I remember a kid looking at my bag and going through all the band names, and he's saying, "Where's AC/DC?" And I had no idea who AC/DC were. And they found that highly amusing. They thought I was from Mars or something. Weird that I didn't know who AC/DC were. Anyway, so that's where I got started at my school. It was lonely the first year. I did try and reach out and make a friend. There was a kid called, he had a really long Greek name, and he had bad acne. He had like powder on his face. I remember from the very first time I started talking to him how he was going to change his name. On the day he turned 18, he was going to change his surname. Tried to befriend him because he seemed a bit of a loner, but he didn't last the whole year. He disappeared. So for that first year I was terribly lonely, relying on my sister for things to do on the weekends. So in that first year there was a kid at school that told me he could make me a chopper, and it was like for $15 he could make me a chopper. And I paid up the money, and he brought it to school, and in hindsight it was fantastic. I mean, all he'd done was cut the forks off the front of the push bike, and he'd extended another set of forks, and he got a little white pram tyre and put it on the front, and he had a big set of banana handlebars for me, and a big chunky tyre at the back. It was fantastic for $15. I remember riding it to Nana's, so from East Malvern across down to Elstonwick. It was quite a ride, but I remember being quite embarrassed because a lot of people were looking at me on this chopper. I find that strange now that, so embarrassed by what people were thinking and looking at me. Excuse me. Cold day in Melbourne, very cold day. So, I wanted to get my hands on a guitar in those early days, and Roscoe, I loved Roscoe from the very first moment. I remember that first afternoon when we put my bags down, he said, "You want to go for a walk down the park? We'll take the footy." And I remember looking at him, and he had long hair, and he had a big bushy moustache. He still does. And he was real cool. An adult with long hair was something I hadn't seen for maybe ever. So we went down the park and we kicked the footy and all sorts of things. So anyway, I was raving about wanting a guitar, and he said, "I've got a guitar." So he went out the garage and he produced his acoustic guitar. So in the days that followed, I found some pots of paint in the garage, and I painted it black and white. I painted the body black and white, and I did the frets black and white. I remember him being a bit put out, and Pauline saying, "You really shouldn't have done that. That was Roscoe's guitar. You should have asked before you went and painted it." I totally ruined it. I was to take up guitar lessons with a fella called Mr. Gay, Jack Gay, at Caulfield Tech, either that year or the year after. One of the things I liked to do was to take the number 5 tram into the city. My sister, told me how to get around, and the number 5 tram came to the Wattle Tree Park. That's where it terminated and finished, and you walked from our house, and you waited, and maybe every half hour or hour a tram would come. It was quite a long trip into the city, about, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes I suppose. Tram, and I'd hop off at Spencer Street or Flinders Street station, and I'd walk around the city, and I was always looking for all the things we'd had before we went away. Board games mainly. I'd go to toy shops looking for, we had a board game called the Battle of the Big Horn. Always wanted that back. There used to be a toy shop called Tim the Toy Man in Melbourne, and we loved to go to Tim the Toy Man, getting a couple of toy soldiers, and Mum would spoil us. So I was always walking around the city looking to get these things back. I would also, on most occasions when I took that tram into the city, visit the South African Airlines booking office and look at the brochures and get air fare prices. Remember, they had a big lion skin in the window of their office. That was until the protesters shut them down in late 76 or early 77 for their apartheid links. I remember being mad about sports jumpers. There's a place called the Melbourne Sports Depot. I remember I got a Footscray football jumper and I got a South Melbourne football jumper, early days. Now, at some stage during the year, word came out that the supermarkets were looking to employ kids to fill roles, temporary, part-time after-school roles. So a whole group of us rode off to Safeway in Glen Huntly. Yeah, so they employed about, half a dozen of us, and I was one of them. But I didn't last very long at Safeway. I just didn't have it, for whatever reason. I was too slow or too, didn't know what I was doing. So they let me go. But that gave me a little bit of experience. So word came soon afterwards that they were opening a brand new supermarket in Carnegie, a Woolworths. And so about 20 of us went from Caulfield Tech, and also kids from Murrumbina High, Caulfield High. We all went along to this Woolworths in Carnegie, and I was one that got employed. And I actually stayed there for a number of years, and so that's how I got in. And that job at Woolworths changed my life, because it gave me some friends. Halfway through the year, I was going through some of the letters that I still have. I was writing to Aidan to say I wanted to come back to Brakpan, that I was, I was looking forward to getting back to Brakpan. I missed my friends Gould and Johan and all those kids, and although I'd gone for years hating Brakpan and complaining how I hated Brakpan, I missed it. I wanted to get back to my friends, I was terribly lonely, and I remember a letter Aidan wrote, and I had said I wanted to come home. Can you ask Dad? Tell him I want to come home. And Aidan had written, it isn't home, dummy. Where you are living now is home. Which was the truth. But when I got to be at Woolies, I made new friends, and I was to find my first girlfriend in Australia, but that will be for another episode. One last story I want to tell you, and it was probably one of the best things to happen in the first, it may have been the first 2 years, but it sticks in my mind as a fantastic story. So I was laying on the couch one time on one of those Sunday mornings, which was always contentious with my sister. My sister wanted to vacuum, she wanted to go shopping, she wanted to clean the house. Saturday was her cleaning day, and I wanted to lay on the couch as a teenager, eat Cocoa Pops and watch my music shows. So it was always going to be conflict. But on this particular Saturday morning, they announced that Alice Cooper was going to tour Australia, and I think I jumped from the couch, and I would have been ecstatic. I remember running to tell my sister, and she was a bit off-putting and said, "Oh, you're not going to see that deviant." Of course I was. He was my hero. He was my idol. I loved Alice Cooper, and so I got the details, and as it got closer, they started making more announcements for the dates and how to get tickets. Now, in those days, it was before computerization, so I found out that you could get the tickets at Festival Hall, which was where the show was going to be held. Now, Festival Hall, the Beatles had played, and it's still going in a format or another, but all the bands of the time played Festival Hall. I didn't think Alice Cooper was known in Australia, so I didn't expect anyone to really be there, and I went the night before to get the tickets. I expected to be front row. But anyhow, I got there, let's say it was a Friday, and I got there at about 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and the tickets went on sale Saturday morning at about 9. I don't know what I did for bedding. Maybe I took a sleeping bag. Not sure. But anyway, I got off the train station at West Melbourne. I walked across to Festival Hall, and the first thing that surprised me was the amount of other kids that were there. The line actually stretched around from the ticket box down to the side of Festival Hall, and then, part way to the back. So I was quite surprised how many kids were there. So we sat down, and there were kids with top hats. This was the time Alice Cooper had put out Welcome to My Nightmare. There were kids in tails, the kids with the Alice Cooper makeup, t-shirts. They were playing Alice Cooper cassettes. So we sat down, and we started waiting, and it wasn't long till you got talking. You had something in common with these kids, which was our love of Alice Cooper. So we got talking, and sure enough, there were shenanigans going on during the night. There were girls, teenage girls, lots of boys kicking footballs and frisbees, and yeah, it was really good. And the next morning, the line started to move as the ticket box opened, and so we moved around the side. Now, one thing I'll never forget is at Festival Hall is an overpass. It dips down and goes off towards the port, the dock areas. And so there was some roadworks going on, and there was a detour sign, a big yellow roadworks detour sign. And some of the kids got this detour sign. They thought it'd be funny to detour the cars coming under this tunnel down to the side street. So they put the detour sign in the middle of the road, expecting the car would come up through there slow and then turn and go on this non-existent detour. But it didn't happen like that. The car came flying under the overpass. As it reached the ridge, it just went straight through the metal sign, and the windscreen was smashed. This woman got out screaming. Soon the police arrived. They wanted to know who'd put the detour sign there. They carted away some kids, and I guess those kids missed out on the Alice Cooper concert. Anyway, I got my ticket. It wasn't too bad. It was sort of, I'd say about 20 rows from the front, sort of centre. Pretty good seat. On my own, I only got one ticket, and so then it was the waiting, and it was about a 6-month wait for him to arrive. I'd seen one band. I'd seen the Doobie Brothers at Festival Hall after I came back from South Africa. That was the first rock concert I went to. Once again, on my own. I did almost everything on my own. That first year, I wanted to see all the football games at the suburban grounds, which was still being. I remember going out to Glenferrie Road, where Hawthorn, I'm a Hawthorn supporter, they used to play at Glenferrie Road. I remember getting the tram up there, and I couldn't see anybody. There were no supporters, and I found out that Hawthorn didn't play at Glenferrie anymore.
The breeze will blow across the kick from his right to left-hand side. He allowed for it. It's going on its way. It may have been picked up by the breeze. Now the ball taken. A mark has been taken by Peter Hudson. Is it goal 100 coming up or not? For 1977, Peter Hudson about to have the first shot for goal for Hawthorn. He's still crept around a few metres. The police have lined around the fence to try and keep the crowd. I don't think the crowd will jump the fence here. Not in the final. Hudson going for goal 100. He's got it. Up.
So that first year, every Saturday, I got the train and I went and saw Hawthorn play on my own. But at all the suburban grounds like Victoria Park, Collingwood, Windy Hill, Essendon, where Carlton play, all those grounds. Don't think I went to Geelong, wasn't that mad. But most of the other grounds, I went to see Hawthorn. But anyway, so Alice Cooper's coming out 6 months' time. I wait, and so he arrived. And my sister had found me a set of tails. I only recently got rid of them. Those things that the Marx Brothers used to wear, tails. This was quite a ratty pair. All the cotton had come away, and it was quite ratty on the collar. But they were proper tails, and I had the Alice Cooper makeup. And so I went along, saw the show. It was fantastic. It was I think there's a concert film of the Welcome to My Nightmare tour where Alice has all the props on stage, the guillotine, the skeletons, all that sort of thing. There were two guitarists, Steve Hunter, I think, and Dick Hunter, I don't remember. There were two brilliant guitarists that were either side of him, especially for the Black Widow. Steve Hunter and I can't remember the other fella. Anyway, yeah, a fantastic show, really loved it, and first time I'd sort of seen Alice, and I did see him a couple of times after that, but that was by far the best. I mean, I prefer Alice Cooper with his band before he went solo, but that was great. And then we got on the train to come back to change at the main Flinders Street station to get, for me to get the tram home, I think. And halfway along the line, the train stopped and everything went dark, and then an announcement came that the train had broken down. We had to get off and walk along the train lines. I mean, that wouldn't happen anymore. But there I was in the middle of the night. It was a beautiful, hot, starry night, and in my Alice Cooper makeup, walking along the train lines of West Melbourne. So fantastic. That really sticks in my mind as being one of the highlights of me being back in those early days. I think you've got plenty to think about. I hope you found some of this of interest. I should say also that my sister got married in those first 6 months down at the little park down from where we were living. You walk through cobblestone laneways. I was there recently, or a year ago, for my friend's memorial service down these cobble lanes, back streets of East Malvern, in a little park with a lake and ducks and beautiful. My sister got married, and I remember I insisted on wearing the army shirt, and then we were kicking the football around in the background as the service was being conducted. So those are my memories in the first year of being back in Australia. As I mentioned, loneliness, but the loneliness started to fade after a year, and by the second year of back at Caulfield Tech, I'd found my place as the joker in the class, and I was starting to make friends, and the loneliness was fading. So I'm not sure what we'll do with the rest of this stream. I did go back to Africa, and we might talk about that in the next episode of this stream. We'll cover briefly what I did, my first job, and how I got settled in Australia again. My brother came back a year after I got back, and how we sort of got things going there. And then I did return to Africa in 1983, I think. So we might touch on what got me going back to Africa again. That's plenty for now. I hope I haven't dragged on too long and bored you with this, my memories. And there's more Boer War channels, videos to come, plenty of them. I've got 3 in the can now. I've got some fascinating stories and things to show you with my Boer War episodes. We've got about 3 months now till I fly out, and I'm getting excited and terrified at the same time about that. So you're going to come along for the ride. You'll be there from the time I'm at the airport to the time I get off, and in the car on our way to see some of these sites that we've heard so much about. So hope you're all well. Thanks for tuning in, and you take care now. Bye-bye.